Hello beautiful friends, I am here today with a project to share for the Cut to You design team, and this one is a little bit special because it is in celebration of Cut to You's 3rd birthday, and to celebrate, all of the design team members were tasked with scrap lifting our lovely boss lady Gwen, and I have chosen to scrap lift this layout of hers, which she created back in 2019, and it is, as you can see, a Christmas layout. It is using the Christmas tree row cut file, and I'll leave the link for that in the description box down below. So for as long as I have been scrapbooking, I have enjoyed working on Christmas layouts in July, because where I live here, July is the middle of winter, so it's really nice and cold and cozy, and the commercial nature of Christmas means that it just feels like it is supposed to be cold and cozy. So for me, documenting my Christmases in July has always been something that I've enjoyed doing. So throughout this whole month, I will have quite a few Christmas themed projects coming up to share with you. So if you're not already subscribed to my channel, I'd love for you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the bell if you want to be notified, because I do have lots of really fun festive layouts coming up this month. So while I have been chatting away, you have been watching me back my cut file. Now, this video is significantly longer than my more recent videos. Because this is a scrap lift and there's not a lot of design decisions that I'm making myself, I thought I would try something a little bit different and not edit out a lot of the more tedious parts of my process that I usually exclude from my final videos. So ordinarily I would be starting off my videos showing you a cut file that has already been backed off camera. But this time around I thought I would just go ahead and include pretty much my entire process. So that's the reason why this one is a little bit longer. It does mean that I'm going to be chatting to you a little bit more because I've got a little bit more time to fill in. I have still sped it up quite a bit because I don't think you want to be watching me do this in real time. But if you enjoy this, I would love for you to give me some feedback down in my comments. Like I said, I do edit out a lot of my process because it is quite I don't find it particularly interesting to watch, but you know, we are all different, and if this is something that you do enjoy, I would love for you to let me know, and I can certainly look at including more of that in my upcoming videos. So for this particular design, there's a few different ways that I go about backing my cut files. My favorite at the moment is using my Silhouette software and Cameo to cut out my backing pieces, and I'll include a link also in the description box down below on my recent tutorial on how I do that. But one of the other ways that I back my cut files, as you can see that I'm doing here, when it's a simpler design, I do go ahead and trace it onto the back of a piece of pattern paper. So I flip my cut file upside down and then trace the inside, or sometimes the outside, from the reverse side of the pattern paper, and then flip it all over and adhere it down. So because this design is fairly simple, it's some pretty straightforward tree shapes, I felt like this was going to be the quickest and the easiest way to get this one backed. Now I am using the Cocoa Vanilla Merry and Bright collection, which is their most recent Christmas collection. For Gwen's layout, she did use another Cocoa Vanilla Christmas collection, but it is a little bit older. Fortunately for me, the most recent Cocoa Vanilla Christmas collection, the color scheme is really, really similar, and that's one of the things that really drew me to Gwen's original layout. I loved that it's not traditional Christmas colors, which for me, being in Australia, we don't have the traditional Christmas colors, don't always work. So these beautiful pinks and oranges are much more representative of the hot Australian Christmases that we experience here. And to back these cut files, I am using a selection of papers from I think it's an A5 paper stack that this collection came with. And I'm using these ones because when you use the smaller format papers, the patterns are a lot smaller, so you get to see smaller in scale, I should say. So you get to see more of the pattern behind the cut file. So I went and chose a couple of pattern papers that were similar to the papers that Gwen used in her layout, but they're not quite the same. And when I'm making my choices about which paper to use on which tree, I am referring to Gwen's original design just to get some ideas, but also because my pattern papers aren't quite the same, I'm not going to end up with the same end result. So I'm also trying to visualize in my head how this is going to look once it's all down on my page. One of the things I forgot to mention at the very beginning that you saw me do, this layout is, as I mentioned, featuring the Christmas tree row cut file, but it's been cut twice from some white cardstock, and then one of them has been trimmed in half. So 2 of the trees will sit out on their own on the right hand side of the page, and then the other 3 trees in the cluster will layer up in front of the complete cut file, which you will see will make a little bit more sense a little bit further into the video once I start laying everything down. But that's how I achieved that look, which is a great way to really extend the life of your cut files, particularly with something like this where it's easy to trim it down. And because the photo lays over the top of the edges, you don't notice the cut edge where you have a little bit of a slightly incomplete Christmas tree. And again, that will make more sense a little bit later on in the process. So that is the last tree just about backed. I have left the stars blank, so I haven't backed those. That is exactly the same as Gwen's layout. And there you can see how I've cut that other one down. All right, so we're moving on from backing the cut files, and now I'm creating my background. I've got a piece of white textured cardstock, and I am trimming it down to 11.5 by 11.5 inches. Then I've got this beautiful brown wood grain, and what I am doing is I'm just cutting out a 1 inch, or using my trimmer and gutting the middle and leaving a 1 inch border around the edge. This is something that I do on almost every layout. I love to add a pattern paper border on my white, behind my white background. And Gwen's layout, now knowing Gwen, I'm not sure if this was mixed media that she applied to her background page or if it was a paper that came like that. I'm more inclined to think that the paper possibly came like that, but I may be wrong. I haven't actually asked her that. But it had a real mixed media watercolor look to it, so I am replicating that on my white background. You've just watched me apply some gesso, some clear gesso to my paper or to my cardstock, and I set it aside to dry, and now I am coming in with a couple of different Lindy's Stamp Gang Magicals powders in some colors that coordinate with my pattern papers. They're sort of peachy pinky colors. And I'm coming in and I'm just really roughly placing the watercolor or the water down on my page, smooshing it in with a small piece of plastic, and then coming back in with my paper towel to soak up some of that pigment. If you followed along with my channel for a while, you have probably watched me try out a whole bunch of different mixed media techniques and get disappointed in the final result because it never really turns out quite the way I visualize it. But that particular technique that you just saw me using then, that seems to be getting me what I want. And I think dabbing off the pigment with a paper towel has been the key for me, because I don't like a lot of dark, bright or really, I don't like a lot of pigment. So dabbing it off with the paper towel just really lightens it up a bit and gives me an end product that I'm much happier with. So I've got my photo. This is my little girl Violet when she was just a few months old. This was a photo that I took of her all dressed up in a little Christmas outfit. I have backed the photo onto some plain white cardstock, and then I used another really small floral print from the A5 paper stack to add another mat there. I took my background page, now that it's dry, over to my sewing machine, and I stitched a border around the edge. And I'm just showing you here, I don't know if this is something that I've ever shown on camera before, but this is how I finish off the back side of my layouts. That purple tape there is some painter's tape that I purchased really inexpensively
at Bunnings, which is a hardware store here in Australia. I don't apply it directly onto any photos or or near any photos. But because it's on the back of the page and there's quite a few layers between the tape and the photo, I don't mind that it's not acid free. It's really just to tape those edges down so that when I'm placing the layout into a page protector and then into an album, that they're not going to get caught and tear on anything. Okay, so now I am adding some foam tape behind my Christmas trees, and I'm going to play around with the placement and see where I want those to go. That foam tape that you've seen me use is another really cheap purchase from Bunnings. That's the hardware store. This one is an acid free. I paid a little bit more, only a couple of dollars more, to purchase a roll that was acid free. It's called photo mounting tape. And it's really, really inexpensive. It's not super high, so it's not adding a huge amount of bulk to my layouts. The only downside to this one is that because it is super, super sticky, the backing tape on it can sometimes be a little bit tricky to get off. So I'm ready to place my Christmas trees down. You will have seen me just then add some liquid adhesive behind my foam tape. So I did say that it is really super sticky, and it's very likely that it would stick down, but when I am adhering anything to any kind of mixed media, particularly when I've used gesso or texture paste, I do like to add a little bit of liquid adhesive just to make sure that it grips onto that background nice and tight, and then it's not going to come off and float about in a page protector in my album in 5 years time or however long it may be. So I'm using my T-square ruler to make sure that I've got those Christmas trees lined up nice and straight, and you can see that I'm bringing my photo back in a couple of times just to make sure that I've got the positioning of those trees where I want them to be. As I mentioned earlier, because I have trimmed one of these cut files in half, you can see on the right there that Christmas tree is not quite finished. So I want to make sure that I have placed my trees down so that my photo will cover up those slightly wonky edges, and then you would never know that I have trimmed this cut file in half. And with the photo, I'm only adding some foam to the spots on the photo where it's not going to be sitting up on top of one of the Christmas trees. Where it is sitting on one of the trees, obviously I don't need any additional foam. So I just want to make sure that it's not going to fall flat anywhere else. Now we're moving on to some embellishing. So I initially thought I was going to use that title Holly Jolly, which I fussy cut out from, I think it's one of the cut apart sheets, but that doesn't end up making it as my title. I placed it down there just while I work out a few things, and then put a little doily just for some added texture and just a little bit of visual interest behind that top corner of my photo. Now, one of the things that I loved in Gwen's layout was the circular embellishments. The product that I'm using, the Cocoa Vanilla collection that I'm using, didn't have any of those elements in it. So I have pulled out my punches, my circle punches and a scallop punch, and I am going to create a few little DIY embellishments. So that first one there, I've used the same wood grain backing paper, and I cut a scalloped circle out, and then just a plain circle from the Christmas tree paper, and then I've stuck down one of the, what are they called? The little buttons, the flare buttons on top of that, and layered that up. And now we're switching back over to the title, where I pulled out this wood grain thicker set, and I found this title that says Santa Baby. And what I'm doing here is I'm peeling off the adhesive layer. When I pulled off part of the title, part of the adhesive layer came off, and then I thought I would just pull it all off the entire title, and that will allow me to move it around and just see where I want it to sit. And pretty much straight away I know that I want it to overlap the bottom of that photo, but because the photo is up on foam, I'm just going to add some tiny little bits of, this is some foam strips, to a couple of spots in the lower half of these words. And again, that's just to help them to sit up off the page so that I don't end up with them bending in half once it's placed in an album, or coming off the top of the photo and falling flat. So with those pieces of foam in place, I'm now adding just a little bit of wet adhesive up on the top, to help that to stick down to my photo. And that is my title, Santa Baby, which was perfect. Looking at this photo now of my little girl, I was really struck by just how differently I recall her looking. So yeah, it's not the most flattering of angles, this particular photo. And looking back on it now, yeah, I think through the eyes of a mother of a baby, our babies just look like the most beautiful and the most adorable children in the world. But looking back on the photos now, it's not always the case. Not that I don't think that she's beautiful, I do, but it's just, yeah, that this particular photo, it's not super flattering, but it is the only photo that I had of her in this sweet little Christmas outfit. And she's holding a little candy cane in her hand. So because it's the only photo that I had, it is the photo that is getting documented. Now I'm coming in with my journaling. I typed this out on my typewriter, and then as you saw, I used my little guillotine paper trimmer to trim it down into strips. And then I am using my wet adhesive and some tweezers just to place them all down. Usually what I do is for the first one, I use my T-square ruler to make sure that the first strip is nice and straight, and then I can eyeball it from there. So I'm coming back in with my punches again because I want to create a few more little custom made embellishments. I now have a circle punch and I have a little heart punch, and I am just going to layer those up on top of each other, and then they can become additional embellishment pieces, which is quite similar to what Gwen used in her original layout there. And I'm adding some little pieces of foam behind the hearts just to give those little embellishments a bit more dimension. I didn't adhere my date down underneath my journaling. I decided that I wanted to pop the date onto one of these little labels, which is a cut apart sheet from the paper stack. So I've chosen this little pink candy cane print one, and I'm going to use my wet adhesive just to adhere that down to the top, and trimmed it in half because then I can make use of the other side of that label on another layout. And I've added some foam behind it because, again, I'm going to be tucking it underneath the photo in between those layers, and I don't want that to fall flat against the page. So I've added just a little bit of foam tape there to help it stand up so that it sits flat there against the photo. And now we are coming towards the end. Thank you so much for sticking with me if you are still here. Getting stuck into some embellishing. So as you can see in Gwen's layout in the top right there, she's got that large 25 piece. And when I created that little embellishment, custom embellishment cluster on the left there, that was what I was trying to replicate. And then I've tucked the little circles with the hearts, one to the top right of the photo and one there just above the title to add a little bit of extra interest there. Now I'm going through the the ephemera pack, and I'm just pulling out any of the pieces that I think might work. They won't all make it on, but when I go through my embellishments, I just tend to pull out everything and then see what I can make fit. So one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to tuck this little house in on the left there, and the reason for that is that you can see on the right, that tree that's on the far right is almost touching the border, and the balance wasn't there over on the left hand side. So by tucking that little tree in, it brings that side of the layout over to be just about touching the border. So it just balances it out a little bit, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. And now I'm just adding a few other embellishments around the layout. I'm using some foam tape to add some dimension. So you would have just seen me add some foam to the outside of that little Christmas bauble. And that just helps to give a little bit more interest by adding some dimension to the layout. I do have a few different types of foam tapes that I use. Some are much thicker than others, and sometimes I double them up if I want extra dimension. When I am tucking florals in behind things, I will almost always cut those florals in half because you're not going to see all of it. I don't see why I should tuck half of it away. If I cut it in half, then I can use it more than once. So with that bauble, I wanted to add just a little bit of something extra. So I've grabbed a tiny little hole punch and then just punched to the top of it and grabbed some white twine, and I have threaded that through and tied it into a little bow. And the last thing I need to do is come in with my Nuvo drops. So Gwen's layout featured some really nice big enamel dots, and I didn't have any that matched this collection. So I'm bringing in my trusty Nuvo drops, and I am just making sure that they are really nice, big, chunky drops going down. And that is it for this layout. I want to say thank you so much for watching. You'll find all the details for everything that you need to know for this layout down in my description box below. Here are some close-up photos, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.